Hello friends, welcome to Saga Thursday. I'm your host Raj. Today we are doing a video for the newbies out there, a how to play Saga 2nd edition video. So this video will give you the basics of how to play the game, but it should give you enough flavor and let you know what Saga is all about. So Saga is a skirmish game of 20 to 50 models usually. It's played on a 3x4 and it has some unique characteristics. So Saga uses a battle board. So on this side we have some last Romans, aka Byzantines, and whatever army you're playing, you're going to have a matching battle board, which you will use to control your forces and give your troops power-ups and such throughout the game. And you can see there are some unique dice sitting here. So each faction will have its own unique dice. And we're going up against some Vikings today. So they have their own corresponding battle board with their own unique dice that go along with it. So these are your Saga dice, and this is your battle board. The other unique thing about Saga are the measuring sticks. So they are not necessary per se, but the very short is 2 inches, the short is 4 inches, the medium is 6 inches, and the long is 12 inches. So all the measurements use medium, short, long for the rules descriptions, but of course you can use a tape measure. So I've set up some models here. We're just going to jump right in. I think that's the best way to learn these kinds of things. So we're going to say it's halfway through the last Romans turn here, and we're going to execute some activations here to show you how that stuff works. So we're going to activate this unit of warriors, and I'll talk about why I moved a dice from the battle board a little later in the video. So you can see these guys are in a formation. This is a unit of 8 guys, so wherever you deploy as is what you have to be for the rest of the game, a lot like other games. All your troops have to be within very short of each other within that same unit. So we're going to activate these guys for a movement to move closer to those Viking warriors over there. So we are going to go ahead and try to get closer to them. So all infantry troops move a medium measuring stick. So essentially you just pick a guy up, you move him within medium, and all the following troopers need to stay within a short of him as a general rule. So movement is pretty basic. The real key thing here is that troops must move in a straight line. So if you're going to move around an obstacle or something, you would have to do that, with multiple moves. So the placement of the models for combat and stuff like that isn't super important. The whole unit will get to fight, but you just have to move in a straight line. So going around other troops and stuff like that will be tricky. But there it is. That's a basic move. So decent speediness, swiftness. All right, now we're going to activate a unit for shooting. And I'm going to spend a Saga dice over there because we have a unit of archers here, and the range of a bow is long, 12 inches. So line of fire is pretty simple. We have a woods here. You wouldn't be able to see through the woods, so that would block if you were behind the woods. But basically, if you can draw a line from a model to the enemy you're trying to shoot, you're a golden. You can see through your guys in your unit, but you can't see through an enemy or a friendly unit either. So if there was a unit behind these warriors, you wouldn't be able to shoot them, but these guys are in range. And you do measure range per guy. And it looks, I believe I set it up. So all 6 of these guys would be in range. So we're going to activate that unit for a shooting, like I mentioned. So the shooting and melee steps are very similar, so we're going to learn a lot about that right now. So the first thing we're going to do is generate our combat pool. So for shooting, every 2 warriors generates 1 attack dice. So this will be different depending on the type of troop. Like a warlord is hardier, he'll generate more attack dice. And your levies are a little crappier, they generally won't generate as many. So they're going to get 1 attack dice for every 3 models, two models in the unit. So we're going to hit three attack dice. So shooting in Saga isn't particularly good. There are certain battle boards that can soup up. For example, these warriors would actually generate 6 attacks in close combat. They generate 1 dice for each guy, but in shooting, they only generate 1 for every 2 guys there. So they've got our combat pool generated. Step 2 is to use Saga abilities and fatigue. So fatigue is a mechanic that we'll get into, but Saga abilities are your abilities on the board here. So up top are the basic abilities, such as movement and shooting. So you can see I've been pulling dice from there. If you had abilities keyed up with dice here, you could use them. So this board is blank. So this is what you don't want to see when you're playing Saga, is a blank board with no dice. You want your dice sitting out here providing bonuses. So that is no good for us. But the Vikings board, we do have something queued up. So Saga abilities are queued up here when a dice is sitting on the corresponding ability. And the dice that you need will be shown as the symbol there. And then when there's multiple symbols, basically that just means you only need 1 of them. You don't need 3 of these, for example. Some abilities do cost 2 dice, and they'll have a little plus symbol. So up here, we have the combat bonus ability. And this ability can be used as a shooting reaction. So there's different keywords here that we'll get into. But basically, I gain 1 attack or defense dice, and I gain 2 if I used I believe this is a Sagalaz. And basically, it's a rare symbol. So I'm going to use that ability right now. So I'm going to take it off the board and give myself 2 defense dice, which are going to come in handy. I will just set these aside. The next step is to roll the attack dice once everybody has used all their Saga abilities that they want to use. So we have nothing else going on these boards. So what you need to hit with your attack dice depends on the troop that you are going after. So these are warriors. Everybody's warriors today. Warriors are hit on a 4+, so that's the innate attribute of a warrior. So we're looking for 4s here. Let's see what happens. And we've got 2 hits and 1 miss. So decent. So once a unit is hit with the attack dice, the next step is to roll defense dice. So defense dice are, for each hit that you take, you can roll a dice, and against shooting on a 4+, you will be able to block that hit and not suffer any damage. So they took 2 hits, so they're going to roll 2 dice for that, but I use my combat bonus ability here, so I'm going to actually get to roll 2 more. So I'm going to have 4 chances to block 2 hits, and we're looking for 4+ here. And let's see what happens. Boosh. We are good to go. So they see 3 hits, actually. So they had 1 to spare. So these guys are good. They do not suffer any consequences from that volley of arrows from those Romans there. So that is can't complain about that. Okay. So that was a movement. That was a shooting. And let's jump into the Vikings turn. So we're going to go over the battle board in a little more depth here before we execute a charge and a melee. So on your turn, you start with the orders phase, which is when you roll your Saga dice. So I'm going to roll 6 Saga dice because we're going nuts here. Why not? In a following video, I'll explain a little bit more about generating these Saga dice, but basically it depends on the number of troops that you have. So whatever you roll is what you can use on your boards here. So up top are the basic abilities. These 3 abilities are used to activate troops. We have activate Hearthguard or Hero, activate Warriors, activate Levies, and you can see their activation abilities. And these are the dice that are used. So these abilities can be used more than once, any number of times. Down here we have the sort of faction-specific abilities, which for the Vikings are a lot of attack abilities. And we can see, based off our dice, we have a lot of These are Fehus in the runic alphabet. These are Bay Orcs. So these are the most common dice, or sorry, common symbol. So there's 3 of these on each dice. Then there's going to be 2 of these Bay Orcs, so they're kind of uncommon. And then every dice only has a single Saga Laws, which is a rare for these guys. And every faction follows that kind of format here. So you can see we have an ability that costs 2 rares, so that one's going to be quite awesome, and we will not be able to use it. The other abilities are a mix of rares, uncommons, stuff like that. So we're going to queue up some abilities here. So one thing is I want to activate these guys for a couple of movements, I would say. So let's queue up a couple of these dice. We're going to queue up this Uller ability, which is quite awesome. And I wish I had rolled another uncommon, because this Frigg ability is pretty good. Loki and Odin. All right, we're going to throw these ones into the combat pool just to keep things moving here. So I have accomplished my orders phase. So you have to allocate all your dice before you start actually moving your troops. So you kind of have to decide on your game plan whether you're going to activate your levies or your warriors, or which combination of activations you want to do. So you kind of got to think of your battle plan ahead of time and figure it out kind of before you start moving your troops here. So let's say that our orders phase is complete, and we're going to do get on to our activation phase, which is the second half of the saga turns, which is actually moving your troops. And that's kind of what we were doing previously with these guys, showing you a move and a shooting. And now we're going to resolve a charge activation. So I want to activate a unit of warriors. So I'm going to spend a dice, and I'm going to bring these guys in. So a charge is essentially identical to a movement, but you end in base contact with a trooper. So the significance there is certain abilities will only be keyed off charges, or it might allow you to charge, or it might allow you to move. So that's kind of the difference there. And then when you resolve a charge, you're going to immediately resolve a melee as well. So let's go ahead and get these guys into the fray. So when you want to do a charge, you're going to pick a model that is within range. So you can pre-measure at any time in the game of Saga, so it's pretty cool, so you know if you can charge or not. And then you're going to move in a straight line that guy in, and then you're going to follow it up with the next guy. And essentially, if you can try to get into base contact, you are going to try and do that. So these guys can get in. And then if you cannot get into base contact, then you just get as close as you can, because we said everybody could fight. So that is not too shabby. So we got ourselves a little fracas here. So let's resolve that melee combat. So step 1 is something called close ranks, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but if you are equipped with shields and spears, shields and swords, you can kind of group you guys together and fight defensively. It has a little more complexity, but it makes your guys a little more defensive, so we're not going to do that in this combat. So we're just going to assemble our combat pools. So for warriors in close combat, each warrior generates 1 attack dice. So we're going to have 8 attack dice coming from the Vikings, and we're going to have 8 attack dice coming from the Romans, because there are 8 of them. So the base quality of the troops across the factions is identical. There will be differences with equipment, which we'll talk about in a follow-up video, but the kind of the differences in the gameplay come from the boards, where the Romans have a lot of defensive abilities, which they don't have any queued up, where the Vikings have a lot of attack abilities. So we're going to see how the difference of having saga abilities plays out. And so first step is to assemble your combat pool. So there is a cap in close combat of 16 per side. So we're well under that. We're fine here. The step 3 is to use your Saga abilities and fatigue. So we still don't have fatigue. Hopefully we will after this combat. So we're going to use Saga abilities. So starting with the attacker can use Saga abilities. And we do have some abilities queued up here. So we're going to use Uller, which will allow us to re-roll our attack dice, which did not score a hit. So I'm going to kind of burn that. And that ability has been activated. And then the Romans have a chance to use some Saga abilities, but their board is empty. So it goes back to the Vikings. And I'm going to use combat bonus here. I can gain 1 attack or 1 defense dice. So I'm going to use a dice to gain another attack dice. Then we go back to the Romans, nothing there. And then I'm going to use another combat bonus to gain a defense dice, which I'm just going to set aside there. So you go back and forth until essentially both players are happy with it. If you pass on your turn, let's say the Romans did have something they could play, it goes back to the other guy, they can play something, and then when it goes back to the Romans again, they could jump back in, so they haven't forfeited their turn necessarily. But when both sides have finished or you can't play anything else, then you are done. You're ready to make your attack rolls. So basically at this point you're going to roll your dice. There is a caveat. With your Saga abilities and everything, you can't have more than 32 dice at this point. So you can't have more than double of your maximum here. So we're going to roll the Roman attack dice first. So we said both of these units are warriors, so they're hitting each other on 4s. Nothing else is going on here. So these guys are looking for 4s. Oh, decent. Juicy attacks here. Very good. Better than average. The Vikings are hitting on 4s as well, but they're re-rolling misses. So let's see how they do. All right, so we got 7 hits from the Vikings, but the Romans rolled pretty well, so they got 6 without a reroll. And all right, so let's roll some defense dice. So we did 7 hits on the Romans, so they're going to roll 7 defense dice. And in close combat, it works similar to shooting, but you're going to block on 5s instead of 4s. So they're looking for 5s here to try and save a guy. And the Romans save 1 guy, so they're going to take 6 casualties, which we will do in the step right after this. Going back to the Vikings, they're going to roll 6 dice plus 1 because they have an extra defense dice, and they're looking for 5s as well. And they save 2 of their guys. Okay. So step 6 is remove casualties. So let's do the Romans first. So they lost 6 soldiers. So they are going to peel off 6. So basically the rule is you have to leave at least 1 guy in base contact. Otherwise, you have total control over how you want to peel these guys off. So, yep. I lose 6 guys. The Vikings, the Romans did 6 wounds, and we blocked 2, so they're going to lose 4 guys. So we're going to lose these 4. Okay. And now it's the end of combat. So both sides are going to take a fatigue. So we'll finally get to see how that works. Basically, a fatigue marker is something you put on your troops, and it's going to make you a little tired, a little worn down, and it doesn't do anything right away, but it can be utilized later. And then the loser of the combat is going to disengage. So whoever does more wounds is the winner. So the loser disengages, and they start by basically moving a short in any direction that they choose, but they have to end at least very short from an enemy. So that is that. All right, so that combat has been resolved. So that's the end of that activation, and we can keep going. So the great thing about Saga is, as long as you have dice to activate your guys, you can keep activating the same units more than once. So we're actually going to activate these Viking warriors again. So I'm going to spend the dice there, and we're going to activate them for another charge. So let's see, what should we do? Should we beat up on these archers or go after these guys? So we're going to go after these guys. We're going to try to finish them off, and we're going to put them in there. So we're definitely within range, and we'll bring them in again. However, the problem perhaps with the multiple activation is whenever you do a multiple activation, at the end of that activation, so with the second activation, the third activation, fourth activation, you are going to take an additional fatigue for activating that unit more times. So the more activations you do, the more fatigued you will get. So keep that in mind. But we're going to resolve this combat again really quickly. So we're going to have 4 attack dice for 4 Vikings. We're going to have 2 attack dice for 2 Romans. And our boards are clear of Saga abilities. But at step 3, we have the option to use Saga abilities and fatigue. So the attacker goes first. So this is how fatigue works in melee. So fatigue has a few different uses. So this is the main use, however. So the fatigue, we can use the fatigue on the Romans to make the Romans easier to hit, which is reducing their armor from a 4 to a 3. So we hit on 3s with our dice. Or we could use the fatigue to make ourselves harder to hit. So we could, the Romans with their 2 attack dice would normally hit them on 4s, would actually be hitting on 5s if we use the fatigue in that way. So you can use the fatigue to make yourself a little bloodier in combat or to increase your defensive power. And since they only have 2 dice there, I just really want to kill these guys. So I'm going to use the fatigue of the Romans to reduce their armor to 3. So that is the first step of our using Saga or fatigue abilities. Now the last Romans can use the fatigue on my Viking warriors here. So with the 2 fatigue, they have some additional options here because they can use the fatigue to counteract the fatigue use of the Vikings and take their armor back up. And then they could use the other fatigue to take the armor of the Vikings down. Or they could use them both in the same direction. So they could take their armor up twice and basically counteract what the Vikings did, and then they end up 1 bit higher. So the Vikings lower their armor to 3, but with the fatigue. But if we use these 2 fatigues of the Vikings, we can increase our armor to 4 and then 5 plus. On the flip side, we could leave our armor at 3 and use these 2 fatigue to completely take the Vikings down. So we could actually take the armor from a 3 to a 2, which would be pretty amazing. We only have 2 attack dice. Why don't we basically counteract 1 pip of fatigue to take our armor up, and then we'll use another fatigue on the Vikings to take it back, take them down by 1. So the 2 attack dice here, the Romans will be hitting the Vikings on 3s because of the fatigue bonus, and the Vikings will be hitting the Romans on 4s. So 3s here. We got 1 and 4s. 3 here. So we got 3 hits on the Romans. We'll roll their black dice. They save 1. So 2 wounds go through. So these guys are eliminated. Oh, we took a Viking with them. The 1 hit on the Vikings doesn't get blocked, so we lose 1 of those guys as well. So we remove the casualties. If there's no units left to retreat, then you do not do the withdrawal movement. So that is pretty much it. We ran through a movement a shooting, a charge, a melee. We've gone over some of the battle board stuff and kind of shown you how the boards interact. The fatigue, I will say, units are capped at 3 fatigue. Once you get there, you cannot activate except for a rest. So a rest activation is a special activation that you can do and is the last kind of common one. So if you had a unit with a fatigue on it, at the start of its turn, you could use, you still have to use a dice like you normally do, but they could activate for a rest and they basically burn that fatigue. So you can only do that once. So if you had multiple fatigues, you could just lose one of them and you'd have to continue on in your turn. So other uses for fatigues are in the movement phase. So if we were charging these guys, for example, the Roman player could use a fatigue to reduce your movement to a short, which would end in a failed charge. So there's that ability, which is handy. And let's say these guys are even closer. If you had 2 fatigues, or let's say they had 3, when a unit activates and they have a lot of fatigues like that, you can actually use 2 of them, your opponent can use 2, and completely cancel that activation. So having fatigue on you kind of messes up your plans, but it's a necessary aspect of the game. So that is a quick run through of the fatigue mechanics and pretty much everything else. So stuff that we're missing are the different troop types. So there's warlords, hearth guards, which are elite fighters, warriors, which are these guys, and levy. We'll talk about that in a follow-up video. There's equipment options. So these guys have bows. What we didn't see was a bow makes you worse in close combat. But there's also horses, crossbows, javelins, which are kind of interesting. And then we can talk about how you would build your force, how you could set up your units, and some of the more nuanced aspects of the battle board, when you can use these abilities, and kind of some of the differences there between them. So in any case, I hope you've enjoyed this learning video. If you have any questions, please drop me a line below. I'm sure I'm missing some stuff, and kind of deliberately missing some stuff to talk about some more advanced concepts in a future video, but hopefully this will be enough to give you a good rundown of the game of Saga, and if you liked it, please tell a friend. But that's it for now. I'm going to catch you guys next time. Have a good one.
Saga!